Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a special weekend edition of Allison Knows. I'm your host, Allison, and tonight we're diving deep into what may be one of the most consequential, controversial, diplomatic meetings in modern history. So, on August 15th, 2025, Donald Trump met with Vladimir Putin in Alaska, not in Washington, not at a neutral location, not with Ukrainian President Zelensky, in Alaska, a state that, let's remember, Russia once owned before selling it to the United States in 1867 for what amounted to be about 2 cents per acre. The symbolism here is not accidental. Nothing about this meeting was accidental, folks. And by the time we're done tonight, we're going to understand exactly why this summit represents not just a diplomatic failure, but potentially a constitutional crisis that strikes at the very heart of American democracy. We're going to walk through this step by step, the way we always do here in Allison Knows, because the details matter, the context matter, the truth matters. And the truth about what happened in Alaska yesterday is far more disturbing than what we have been told. So buckle up and let's go. Now, the summit, what do we know? Well, let's start with the basic facts, because in Allison Knows tradition, we build our case from the ground up. Here's what we know what happened. At approximately 2 p.m. Alaskan time, Air Force One touched down at Joint Base Emlorf Richardson in Anchorage. Within minutes, Putin's plane arrived. The Russian president was given what can only be described as a red carpet welcome. Literally, there was a red carpet, and was escorted to the presidential limousine, the Beast, for a ride that no foreign leader, let alone an accused war criminal, should ever receive on American soil. The meeting lasted approximately 3 hours. No Ukrainian representative was present. None. No congressional leaders were briefed in advance. None. No formal diplomatic protocols were followed. None. And at the end of it all, Trump emerges to tell us that they made great progress, but that there's no deal until there's a deal. But here's what Trump didn't tell you, and what we're going to unpack tonight. This meeting may have violated multiple provisions of the U.S. Constitution, circumvented congressional authority over foreign policy, and potentially constituted an illegal negotiation with a foreign power without proper authorization. The backdrop behind Trump and Putin read Alaska 2025 peace. Peace? As if Putin, who has spent 3.5 years systematically murdering Ukrainian civilians, bombing hospitals, and committed documented war crimes, is somehow a partner for peace. Yeah, right. This is not diplomacy, folks. This is theater. Dangerous theater with real world consequences. Now let's talk about that red carpet, people. This red carpet welcome, because this is where the story truly gets disturbing. The footage carefully shows what you have seen is the President of the United States rolling out the red carpet again and literally for Vladimir Putin, a man who is wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes, a man who has been credibly accused of ordering the assassination of political opponents, a man who is currently waging an illegal war of aggression against a sovereign democracy. And Trump didn't just welcome him, he gave Putin a ride in the Beast, the presidential limousine that is reserved for heads of state who are allies of the United States. Let that sink in for just a minute. The same vehicle that has carried Winston Churchill, Nelson Mandela, and other champions of democracy also carried Vladimir Putin. This is not normal diplomatic protocol. This is not how you treat the leader of a hostile foreign power. This is how you treat an honored guest, an ally, a friend. Yeah, well, but here's the legal problem. This is where it gets really interesting. By providing this level of ceremonial treatment to Putin, Trump may have effectively recognized Russia's legitimacy in its war against Ukraine. Now, in international law, ceremonial treatment can constitute implicit recognition of a nation's actions or claims. Constitutional scholars are already raising questions about whether Trump had the authority to conduct this meeting without congressional oversight, particularly given that any agreements reached would require Senate ratification under the Treaty Clause of the United States Constitution. But we're just getting started here because the constitutional problems with this meeting run much deeper than ceremonial protocol. So let's go a little deeper. No deal, no outcome, no deal until there's a deal. Again, his food salad. Anyway, there's no deal until there's a deal. That's what Trump told us after 3 hours of closed door negotiations with Putin. But let's parse what actually happened in that room, because Trump's own words reveal far more than he intended. In his Fox News interview immediately after the summit, Trump admitted that he and Putin had agreed on several key points: territorial concessions that would give Russia land it didn't previously control, and US security guarantees for Ukraine. Read that again. Trump agreed to give Putin Ukrainian territory and to provide American security guarantees. This is not the President of the United States negotiating on behalf of American interests. This is the President of the United States negotiating on behalf of Vladimir Putin's interests. But here's the constitutional crisis. Trump does not have the authority to cede foreign territory or to commit the United States to security guarantees without congressional approval. The Constitution is very clear about this. Article 2 gives the President the power to conduct foreign policy, but Article 1 gives Congress the power to declare war, regulate foreign commerce, and approve treaties. What Trump did in Alaska yesterday was negotiated what amounts to a treaty with Russia, a treaty that would fundamentally alter the security architecture of Europe without any congressional input, without any Ukrainian consent, and without any constitutional authority to do so. And when pressed about the details, Trump's response was telling. Quote, now it's really up to President Zelensky to get it done, end quote. In other words, Trump and Putin made decisions about Ukraine's future, and now it's Ukraine's job to accept those decisions. This is not how American democracy works. This is how authoritarian regimes work. And I bet you any amount of money Zelensky is not going to bend the knee. Now, here are some constitutional questions which are raised. Let's talk about the law, because this is where Trump's Alaska adventure crosses the line from diplomatic malpractice into potential constitutional violation. The Constitution establishes a clear framework for how the United States conducts foreign policy. The President has the power to negotiate with foreign leaders, but Congress has the power to approve treaties, declare war, and regulate foreign commerce. This system of checks and balances exists for a reason: to prevent any one person from committing the United States to agreements that could drag us into war or compromise our national security. So, what Trump did in Alaska appears to violate several constitutional principles. Let's go through them. First, the Treaty Clause. Any agreement that commits the United States to provide security guarantees to Ukraine would constitute a treaty under the U.S. Constitution, requiring approval by 2/3 of the Senate. Trump cannot unilaterally commit American military forces to defend foreign territory. Let that sink in for a bit. Point two, the congressional war powers, by agreeing to secure guarantees for Ukraine, Trump may have effectively committed the United States to military action without congressional authorization. This violates the clear text of Article 1, Section 8, which gives Congress the sole power to declare war. Number three, the Take Care Clause. The President's duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed includes existing sanction laws against Russia. By meeting with Putin and potentially agreeing to ease sanctions, Trump may have violated his constitutional duty to enforce existing law. But there's another legal issue that's even more troubling. It's called the Logan Act. This 1799 law prohibits private citizens from negotiating with foreign governments without authorization. While Trump is obviously not a private citizen, legal scholars are questioning whether his negotiations exceeded his constitutional authority to the point where they became unauthorized private diplomacy. So, constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe has already called for a congressional investigation into whether Trump's Alaska meeting violated his oath of office. And he's not alone. Legal experts across the political spectrum are raising serious questions about the constitutional implications of this summit. This is not partisan politics, folks. This is about the rule of law and the constitutional order that has governed American democracy for more than 2 centuries. Yeah, Cookie got his butt in a bind, so let's see what happens. Now, is Melania having some influence? Let's check it. Now, you might be wondering, what does Melania Trump have to do with the Alaska summit? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot. And this is where the story takes an even more disturbing turn. Over the past month, Melania Trump has been unusually active in the public sphere. She issued legal threats against Hunter Biden over comments about Jeffrey Epstein. She has been photographed at high-level meetings. And according to sources close to the White House, she's being increasingly involved in foreign policy discussions, particularly regarding Russia. Maybe cousin Vladimir needed help. This matters because Melania Trump is not an elected official. She has no constitutional role in American foreign policy. She has not been confirmed by the Senate. She has not taken an oath to defend the Constitution. And yet, she appears to be wielding significant influence over decisions that could determine whether America goes to war. The Guardian recently published a piece titled, "She's the One That Matters: The Growing Influence of Melania Trump." The article details how Melania has been present at foreign policy briefings, has been consulted on major diplomatic discussions, and has developed what sources described as a, quote, close working relationship, quote, with Russian officials. Let me be clear about what this means. An unelected, unconfirmed, unaccountable individual may be shaping American foreign policy toward a hostile foreign power. This is not how constitutional government works. This is how oligarchy works. But there is more. Melania's recent legal threats against Hunter Biden came just days before the Alaska summit. The timing is not coincidental, by the way. By creating a media distraction around Hunter Biden and Jeffrey Epstein, Melania helped ensure that the press would be focused on scandal rather than substance when Trump met with Putin. This is a pattern we've seen before. create chaos and confusion to distract from the real story. And the real story here is that American foreign policy may be being shaped by someone who has no legal authority to shape it. The US Constitution is clear. Foreign policy is conducted by elected officials who are accountable to the American people. When unelected individuals start making decisions about war and peace, we are no longer operating under constitutional government. We're operating under something entirely different. Okay, so what is Ukraine's reaction? Let's talk about the elephant not in the room, Ukraine. The country that is actually being invaded, the country whose territory Trump and Putin were discussing, the country whose future was being decided without its consent. President Volodymyr Zelensky was not invited to the Alaska summit. I want to repeat that. The leader of the country being invaded was not invited to the meeting where his country's future was being decided. Zelensky's response was measured but pointed. Quote, "It's time to end the war, and the necessary steps must be taken by Russia. We are counting on America." End of quote. We're counting on America. Think about those words. Here is the democratically elected leader of a sovereign nation that is fighting for its very survival, and he's having to remind the American president that Ukraine is counting on us. But Trump's response reveals everything you need to know about his priorities. In his Fox News interview, I think it's the one he did with Sean Hannity, he says, "Now it's really up to President Zelensky to get it done." In other words, Trump and Putin made a decision, so now it's Zelensky's job to accept them. This is not how allies treat each other. This is how imperial powers treat their subjects. And here's the real legal problem. Under international law, no country has the right to cede another country's territory. The principle of territorial integrity is fundamental to the international legal order. By agreeing to territorial concessions that would give Russia control over Ukrainian land, Trump may have violated not just American law, but international law as well. Ukraine's constitution explicitly prohibits any territorial concessions to foreign powers. Article 73 states that, quote, "Alterations to the territory of Ukraine shall be resolved exclusively by all Ukrainian referendum," end of quote. By pressuring Ukraine to accept territorial concessions, Trump is asking Zelensky to violate his own country's constitution. I don't see that ball or that dog hunting. But there's an even deeper issue here. The precedent is set for American foreign policy is if the United States can negotiate away the territory of its allies without their consent, what does that say about Americans' commitment to other democratic nations? What does it say about NATO Article 5? What does it say about our security guarantees to Taiwan, to South Korea, to Israel? Trump's Alaskan summit doesn't just betray Ukraine, it betrays the entire post World War II international order that has kept the peace for nearly 8 decades. I don't think Trump has any idea about history. Do you? Now, here is the expert analysis. What's next? Let's hear from the experts because what's happening in Alaska has implications that extend far beyond US Russia regulations. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton called the summit a clear victory for Putin and warned that Trump did not lose, but Putin clearly won. Bolton, who served in the Trump administration 1.0, understands better than most how Putin operates and what he's trying to achieve. On CNN, with Fareed Zakaria describing the summit as cringeworthy, noting that Trump's deferential treatment of Putin sent a message to allies and adversaries alike that America is no longer a reliable partner for democratic nations. Yeah, we need to remove the imposter. But the most damning analysis came from constitutional law experts. Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe stated that Trump's negotiations may have exceeded the bounds of presidential authority and called for immediate congressional hearings. Former prosecutor Joyce Vance went further, arguing that Trump's agreement to territorial concessions without congressional approval raises serious questions about whether the president violated his oath of office. And legal scholar Neil Cattell, who served as acting Solicitor General under President Obama, warned that the Alaska summit sets a dangerous precedent that could fundamentally alter the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches. There are not partisan Democrats looking to score political points. These are serious legal scholars who understand the constitutional implications of what happened in Alaska. But perhaps the most telling analysis came from our allies. European leaders have been notably silent about the summit, and that silence speaks volumes. When your closest allies won't publicly support your diplomatic initiatives, it's usually because those initiatives are indefensible. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg issued a carefully worded statement emphasizing that any agreement regarding Ukraine must include Ukraine. A not so subtle rebuke of Trump's decision to exclude Zelensky from the talks. The message from our allies is really clear. America is increasingly isolated, increasingly unreliable, and increasingly willing to sacrifice democratic principles for the sake of political theater. I have some closing thoughts. Our final thoughts. Democracy is at stake. So, where does this leave us? What are we supposed to make of a president who rolls out the red carpet for war criminals, negotiates away Allied territory without consent, and potentially violates the U.S. Constitution in the process? Here's what I think. And this is where we need to be brutally honest with ourselves. What happened in Alaska yesterday was not diplomacy, it was capitulation. It was the surrender of American leadership, American values, and American constitutional government to the whims of an authoritarian dictator. But it's also something more dangerous. It is a preview of what American foreign policy looks like when constitutional constraints are ignored, when congressional oversight is bypassed, and when the rule of law is subordinated to personal relationships with foreign strongmen. The founders designed our system of government with checks and balances precisely to prevent this kind of abuse of power. They understood that concentrating foreign policy authority in a single individual without legislative oversight was a recipe for tyranny. What Trump did in Alaska, negotiating territorial concessions, committing to security guarantees, and potentially violating multiple constitutional provisions is exactly what the founders feared. It's the kind of executive overreach that led them to write the U.S. Constitution in the first place. But here's the thing about constitutional crises, they don't resolve themselves. They require action from other branches of government, from civil society, and ultimately the American people. Congress has a constitutional duty to investigate what happened in Alaska. The courts, a constitutional duty to review any agreements that emerge from these negotiations. And we, as U.S. citizens, have a constitutional duty to hold our elected officials accountable for their actions. The question is not whether Trump violated the U.S. Constitution in Alaska. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Because if we allow this to stand, if we allow a president to negotiate away Allied territory, to commit American forces without congressional approval, to conduct foreign policy outside the bounds of constitutional authority, then we're not just betraying Ukraine. We're betraying the U.S. constitutional system that has governed American democracy for more than 2 centuries. The stakes could not be higher. This is not just about foreign policy. This is about whether we still live under a constitutional government or whether we have crossed the line into something else entirely. That's what's at stake. That's what we are fighting for. And that's why the truth matters, the Constitution matters, and democracy matters. This has been a special weekend edition of Allison Knows. I am your host, Allison, and I'll see you next time. Until, stay informed, stay engaged, and remember, in a democracy, all we have a role to play in defending the Constitution. Thank you for listening. Have a good night.